Hi, everyone. Welcome to session 2 in our phone track. We are talking today about advanced calling scenarios. If you haven't joined us previously, we are really glad to have you here with us today. My name is Sarah Rice, and I'm on the Converged Communications Tech Strategy team here at Microsoft. And I will be your host today. If you've joined us before, welcome back. We are really glad to have you with us. Before we get started, I have the standard few bits of info to share with you. We are in the middle of our phone track. We are in advanced calling scenarios today here on Wednesday, April 19th. We have one more session this week tomorrow with the getting started. So we hope you can join us for that. We'll do an actual demo tomorrow, putting hands on keyboards of all the stuff you see us do today. So we hope you can join us for that. And then next week, we're going to dive right into devices. So we sure hope you can stick around for all of these sessions that we've got for you. If you cannot join us for all of these sessions, don't fret. We will be posting the videos for all of these recordings for all of these sessions out on the Superheroes YouTube channel that we've got set up for you, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So if you can't join us for all of these sessions, no problem. We will be posting those out on the Superheroes channel, which is right here. I'll talk about this right now. The Superheroes channel is accessible through this link right here. You don't need any special access for this. You should be able to just click on that link, and you're going to want to look for the actual playlist that's called Converged Communications Customer Hub. No surprise, that is the name of this customer hub that we're in right now. So Converged Communications is the playlist you want to look for, and all of the recordings that we've already done over the last week and a half are already out there for you. So I've edited those videos and I posted those out there. Today's video will be out there pretty quickly. I don't know if it'll be out there by the end of the day today, but I'll do my darndest to have it out there as quickly as I can. So that's where all the recordings are going to be hosted. And then the decks will be hosted out on the community, which is accessible through this link up here. I know some of you have had a little bit of trouble accessing that community. So our apologies for that. We are working really hard to figure out what the heck is going on there. So please bear with us as we try to work through that. The first step in getting access to that community, if you haven't already accessed or tried to give us consent, is just start by filling out the consent form. That is the first step. And then we are working through the process by which to give you consent and the ability to access the actual Superheroes Yammer community. So if you click on this link today and you're still not able to access it, again, bear with us. We are working through that, and we'll continue to give you updates as we go. So please just try to be patient with us while we work through those issues. The couple things I do want to let you know, you will need to actually, two things. One, you'll need to sign in using your work email. We do recommend that you don't use a personal email account to access the site. And then also, if you do have trouble accessing, you'll want to maybe check in with your IT department as well. There may be some policies in play that are perhaps limiting your ability to access. And then the third thing is also making sure that you're connected to the Microsoft network as well, which you can access from the Yammer, the little gear wheel up here on the right-hand side. So just a couple of tips and tricks to try, that's what I'll say about that for right now. But just know if you are having trouble accessing, we are working on it, and just, again, be patient. Stick with us. We're working on it. I do want to give you a couple other bits of information. We have muted lines just for right now, just to avoid any disruptions while our speakers are presenting today. But we would love to hear your questions as we go today. So we've got a couple of great SMEs who are in the background waiting for your questions. So if you do have them, type those into the chat window and we'll get those answered as we go. I'm sure you've got them. This will be a pretty technical topic today, so do not hesitate to type in your question and we'll get those answered. And then at the end of the session today, we will open up your lines and you'll have the ability to unmute if you would like to ask a live question. We will stop the recording at that point as well, just for, again, privacy reasons. So please know that will come as well. So if you'd like to ask a live question, you will 100% have that opportunity to do that as well. So that will come towards the end of the session. today as well. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. We have got Nick Bear from our Fast Track team. He's a Fast Track SME, or a subject matter expert with our Fast Track team here at Microsoft, and also Cam Lamar, who is a cloud solution architect. And they are going to use our time together today to take us to a 200 level technical depth on some of those advanced calling features in the Teams phones system. So specifically, we're going to talk about emergency calling, call queues, auto attendance, and they're also going to talk about some collaborative calling, planning and design, SIP gateway, along with onboarding and provisioning. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand things off to, I think Nick is going to get us started off today and talk about call queues. So Nick, over to you today.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and I will take control. So today will be, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, good. Thank you. Let me go ahead and turn on my mic or my camera. Thank you so much. It's great to see everybody, or I said be here to be seen by everybody. I'm a little under the weather, so just give me a little bit of slack on that. But today we're going to be talking about call queues, auto attendance, collaborative calling, planning and design, emergency calling, SIP gateway, compatible devices, and onboarding and provisioning. So this will be talking about call queues and auto attendance. So auto attendants let people call your organization and navigate a menu, system to speak to the right department, call queues, call queue, person, or an operator. You can create auto attendants for your organization within the Microsoft Teams Admin Center or through PowerShell. So essentially, the main way to think about call auto attendants is that auto attendants they're just your call tree. I mean, there's nothing super fancy about them, other as far as understanding what their basic functionality is. So it's just like any other place that you call in and it says, press 1 for the operator, press 2 for IT, press 3 for HR. That it's just, as far as just understanding what the basic functionality of it is, it's just your call routing tree is all it is. And then the call queues provide a method of routing callers to people in your organization who can help with a particular issue or question. Calls are distributed one at a time to the people in the queue, who are known as agents. So the call queue provides, a greeting message, music, while people are waiting on hold in a queue, call routing. We have different call routing methodologies. So in this one, it states, first in, first out order to the agents, but we have others as well. Um, Holding options for queue overflow and the timeout. And really the call queues, the main thing to think about that is I believe they're equivalent to like what other people know as like hunt groups. Essentially, it's just a collection of users that you want to call, and depending on which routing method, whether it's longest idle or first in, first out, or specific order, um, however you want to be able to get that going. That's essentially what call queues are. Is essentially whenever I hit this particular call queue, our number, because all call queues and auto attendants require a resource account with the appropriate license, and you can put a number um, on the auto attendant or the call queue, so that way people don't have to go directly. They don't have to call specifically to an auto attendant. So say like IT help desk, they can call. You can give a number directly to that call queue, and say whether it's IT help desk or HR or something like that. They don't have to go to tree all the way down to the specific call queues. They can call directly to the call queue, and then whoever you want to ring whenever somebody hits that call queue. That's essentially what they are. It's nothing super crazy when we're talking about the specific functionality of the basic functionality of understanding what they do. You could do a bunch of really cool things is what we're going to talk about today, but understanding what they are just for simplicity's sake, that's what it is. So we're going to have a word cloud. So for a poll, What are some scenarios you think you can use call queues and auto attendants in your organization? And while that's happening, we're just going to move on, and then I'm sure that we'll visit those later on. So the auto attendants and call queues. So the auto attendant, you have toll-free and local service numbers, dial by name directory, custom greeting and menus, operator option, speech recognition um, in 14 language. And you can configure them via the admin portal UI or for the Teams admin center under voice options. And then you can configure with PowerShell commandlets. So for the call queues, direct calls to agents and your desired distribution method, like we talked about. Choose whether agents can opt in, opt out per queue. Uh, can route to agents based on present state, which is what we talked about, the presence-based routing. Agents can be added manually or be added as a predefined group. Can be used for sales, support, reception, etc. However you want to be able to put those groups together. And this is just going over some steps like we talked about, voice, auto attendants. And then we want to create an auto attendant that will allow people to reach our different departments automatically, and also reach people by saying their name. So, from the Teams admin center, select voice, auto attendant, click the add option to create a new auto attendant, begin filling out the information, including naming the auto attendant, assigning an operator, and selecting the time zone. Now, another question that people ask as well is, how far can I nest these down? And I'm not sure of a specific limit to be able to that you can limit as far as nesting down the auto attendants and call queues. So you can have, say, for instance, say you're a global company, you can have a regional or a global auto attendant that then trickles down to like a region or to a specific office. So say you have like 3 locations throughout the U.S., you can have the entire U.S. auto attendant that then, press 1 for the Seattle office, press 2 for the Dallas office, press 3 for the San Francisco office, something like that. So you can have that and just have it nest down. And as far as when we're talking about enabling calling, obviously you'd have to, the resource account has to have the licenses and to be able to assign a number just like any other user. But then you can have it to where, say you have either the regional or the specific location, the auto attendant resource account has a number, so then people can call into that auto attendant. But all the subsequent auto attendant and call queues don't have a number. There's no need to, because they've already entered our system through the PSTN connectivity on that first auto attendant. So those are just kind of some nuggets for you for future reference. But then we're talking to auto attendant step 2. We want to give callers the option of pressing 1 for sales, 2 for marketing, 3 for service, 4 for HR, and 0 to go back to the operator. In the menu options area, choose a greeting option. In the play menu options, put in the planned choices to offer to the callers. Confirm the ability and process for directory search. So then it's kind of hard to see, but that's essentially what this is talking about, is for your greeting options. How do you want to do your greeting options? Do you want to type out the message for the system to read out, or do you want to add an audio or no greeting message, and then your call routing options? And then also here, you have the option. So 0 is going to be always going to be the operator. You can choose who you want to be the operator, but kind of a pro tip is you could choose a Microsoft 365 group, or you could use that, and then you can select a group of users to be the operator in that group, so that way it'll always ring that group. But then you'll also have the group mailbox essentially that's tied to that, and those users in the operator, they'll have access to that group, to that group's mailbox in their Outlook. So that way, say you have to do a bunch of these, you can dynamically add and remove those users from the M365 group, and they'd have access to the same mailbox. So that way, in case the operator's out for vacation or they leave the company or whatever the situation is, you don't have to continuously go to all these different auto attendants and change out the member that's the operator manually across all these different auto attendants. You could just pretty much kind of like set it and forget it, essentially, is the gist of it. Yeah, in the menu options, choose a greeting option. In the play menu options, put in the plan choices to offer to the callers. Confirm the ability and process for directory search. In this one, it talks about we want this auto attendant to run at all times, regardless of holidays or weekends. So you define what business hours and the behavior desired for this auto attendant, define the holidays and behavior, and confirm what groups of people are included or excluded from this auto attendant, as well as assign the previously created resource account. So this, as far as you're basically setting the business hours is what you're doing for this auto attendant and the holidays, and how do you want to handle it whenever it's outside of business hours or it's the holidays, and then selecting your call agents. So that's essentially what this is specifically talking about. And then this talks about call queues. You go to voices and you go to call queues. And like I said before, all call queues and auto attendants have to have resource accounts. We want to create a call queue for the sales and marketing team that will distribute calls from the auto attendant. So browse the voice tab and select the call queue option. Add option, create a resource account to use. Or use one you have already created previously made. Select the options that fit your specific use case. Confirm your settings and save the changes once complete. There's a good amount of options that you can have. And you'll see kind of the options are a lot of them are the same whenever we're talking about auto attendants and call queues. What do you want to do? How many calls do you want to allow in the queue before you either route it to somewhere else or disconnect, or however you want to do? And then a pre-recorded response. How do you want to handle it after they've been waiting for so long? Specific things that you want to be able to do. And then we get into collaborative calling. And collaborative calling enables customers to connect call queues to a channel in Microsoft Teams. Users can collaborate and share information in the channel while taking calls in the queue. This feature is ideal for scenarios such as IT help desk or HR hotline. IT admins can quickly connect call queues to specific channels, and team owners can manage the settings. Essentially, collaborative calling is just a fancy way of saying, whenever you go to select the members of the call queue, select a Teams channel. I mean, that's literally all it is. That's breaking it down Barney style. That's pretty much the short and skinny on specifically what collaborative calling is. It is pretty neat that you're able to select a channel, and what it does is it'll add the calls tab to that specific channel, and you'll be able to see the agents in that call queue, and you'll be able to see the history. So you'll be able to see the calls of users and voicemails coming into that. And it's going to show it a little bit better here. So it talks about shared call queue history and voicemail accessible within a channel, contextualize and democratize. Information about a call queue and its agents and the rich history and voicemail experience parallels the Modern Calls app. And if you want to give them the option, they can opt in and opt out of that specific call queue. And this gives you a better view of what it specifically looks at. Or what it looks like. So you'll see under the Northwind Traders, you'll see the help desk. You'll see that, this is the name of it, but it adds this calls tab, and you'll be able to see, all calls, my calls, filter it. You could be able to use the dial pad and there's a specific option, it's eluding me right now, that enables you, that you can enable your users that instead of calling out as themselves, so you know their PSTN connectivity number, they can dial out through the call queue. So then you'll be able to see the status of the agents in the call queue, and to be able to see, who's on a call, who's not on a call, those specific things. I believe you'll be able to see if they opt out as well, if they're opt out. But this is a pretty cool option as far as conceptualizing it and being able to see it, be able to see the call queue as opposed to it being a voice only experience. And this just talks about you're able to look at more information directly in the calls that you bring up. So you'll be able to see, the channel conversation notes and actions, the history, the specific caller information. So what are some features you would like to see added in the future for auto attendance and call queues? And this is also going to be a word cloud as well. And now we're going to get into planning and designing. So call queues and auto attendance prerequisites. So to configure auto attendance and call queues, you need the following resources. A resource account, like we talked about. The Teams Phone resource account license. This is the license that you're going to assign to the resource account. And these are, I think the amount you can get of these is dependent on the amount of phone system licenses, I believe. Don't quote me, but we can get you that answer for sure. But this way, you don't have to essentially eat up your paid licenses for resource accounts. We don't want you to do that. So you're not using like your E3s and E5s for these resource accounts just to use these auto attendance and call queue features. At least one Microsoft or customer provided service numbers. And we want to use service numbers instead of user numbers because service numbers, I believe, can take hundreds of concurrent calls versus user numbers can only take like tens. You used to have to put in a support ticket in order to be able to change a number, the number type. But now in the Teams Admin Center, I'm not sure when they added it, but now you could do it kind of like on the fly, which is really cool. So in case for whatever reason you accidentally have you ported over a number and it became a user number, or you want to use a user number as a service number now, you can do that. External calling requires calling plan license or voice routing policy, essentially adding that to the resource account. So think of the resource account as essentially another user account when we're talking about adding PSTN functionality. So that's the main catch here is that if you want external calling, being able to call out to a PSTN line, you're going to have to add PSTN functionality and whatever that entails, depending on whether you're using Operator Connect, calling plans, direct routing, however you're going to do that. But you need to provide that PSTN functionality to that resource account. And so the agent prerequisites, so these are the people that are going to be in your call queues. Agents who receive calls from call queues must be enterprise voice enabled online or on-premise users. In addition, if the call queues are using direct routing numbers, agents who need to conference or transfer calls also require an online voice routing policy assigned if the call queue uses transfer mode, and an audio conferencing license or online voice routing policy assigned if the call queue uses conferencing mode. If your agents are using the Microsoft Teams app for call queue calls, they need to be in the Teams only mode. So this talks about the call queues and auto attendance planning and designing. So these are the things that you want to take a look at and think about whenever you're planning out call queues and auto attendance. So, plan them carefully, write them out, create like a Visio diagram, however you want them to look whenever their users are being routed through your call tree and your call queue. Consider professional recordings to add. Like I said, you can upload recordings, if you um, or if you want to have music on hold, or however you want to do that, you can upload your own recordings. Connect caller to a live person as efficiently as possible. Um, Check out the do's and don'ts in the tutorials above. And so, planning, designing, as far as your business needs, how many call agents will you assign to a specific call queue? Um, how is the existing system set up, and will any changes be required? Will the call center be active 24 hours a day, or have business hours? Do they want distinct initial greetings for the following your business hours, after work, after hours, weekends, holidays, like we talked about? Do they have preferences for on hold music? What languages do you need? What is the usual size of the call queue in the existing call center? How should the agent be selected, which is the routing method? Do we need overflow timeout settings like we talked about? Do you want to allow agents in the call queue to opt out of taking calls? Planning and design, your technical decisions. Agents can be added to call queues in the following ways, or a combination of these. The individual users, distribution list, security groups, including mail-enabled security groups, Microsoft 365 groups, or Microsoft Teams. I've seen it to where, which was new to me, which is the security groups, including mail-enabled security groups, and I believe distribution groups is, I had a customer that they didn't want a shared mailbox. Essentially, whenever a voicemail came in, they wanted it to be distributed to everybody and have their own copy of it, just like a distribution list. And in those specific cases, they use like the security groups, the mail-enabled security groups or distribution lists. And in the case of, like I said, like an operator connect or like a shared mailbox to where everyone has access to it, and kind of collaborate on the voicemails that come in. Um, in that case, I'd recommend the M365 groups because it has the shared mailbox. But the thing is, with the M365 groups, it creates a lot more than the shared mailbox. So it's really just understanding what each option gives you, and kind of specific for what call queue you specifically want that to have. So if you have an existing auto attendant or call queue infrastructure and you're migrating to Microsoft Teams, you'll need to plan to transfer your existing phone numbers to the new auto attendants and call queues, basically porting over your numbers from your present carrier over to us. We're recommending enabling conferencing mode for your call queues if your agents are all using compatible clients. So, and that stuff would be, the latest version of Microsoft Teams desktop app, Android app or iOS, and Microsoft Teams phone version 1449/1.0.94.202 0051601 or later. And then plan your call routing flow. As part of the planning process, we recommend that you work out the call routing for your organization in a diagram. The diagram helps determine the most efficient routing for people calling into your organization. You can also use the diagram to determine the auto attendants and call queues that you need to create, along with related requirements such as service numbers, license, voice routing policies, and resource accounts, and then provides a record for support and any future design changes that you're going to need. And then this shows a visual representation like we talked about, like in a Visio diagram or however you want to be able to diagram this out. So you would have your auto attendants, which are the blues, and then the oranges would be your call queues. So, however you want to be able to route that, as far as, press 1, 2, 3, whatever your case is, however you're routing that. So you can have your auto attendants routing back to your call queue, or routing your auto attendants routing to other auto attendants, or say they go to a call queue and for whatever reason they need to go back to the auto attendant, say there's too many calls in the queue, or it's timeout, however you want to, or the user just wants to get routed back so that way they can get routed to somewhere else. That's what you're that's what you're looking at. So it really helps out if you map it out essentially. And this is just talking about how you can have auto attendants routing to other auto attendants, like we talked about. Your regional to your office, and then to auto attendants in that office that then you can route to call queues at the end. So in summary, call queues allow for definition of a predefined set of agents for answering calls. Callers are placed into the queue and await the next available agent. Auto attendants provide a menu system for callers to locate, place, transfer calls to company users or departments, and provide interaction through phone, keypad, DTMF, or speech recognition. Um, Provide time of day routing. So auto attendants, you can allow users to be able to call end users directly. Speak the name or letters or anything like that, routing directly to or an extension directly to a specific user. But call queues are essentially whenever you want to do groups of users. I think I left out the specific users on the auto attendant. My bad. And then I will turn over to Cam for the emergency calling. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Nick. So I am now, like Nick mentioned, going to turn it over to starting to talk now about emergency calling, and then we'll move over into SIP Gateway. So I'm going to go ahead and take control now. So we are going to be starting off this section with a poll. Go ahead and transition to that now. So the poll question does ask, do you have a clear policy on what to do in case of a user calling in emergency services? So this is something that you can kind of just take a look at. We'll get kind of a rough gauge of how things are going, but the goal for today is to, at the very least, give you guys a little bit more insight into what you may need to set up in terms of these emergency calling policies and voice routes and things like that in order to make sure you're compliant and you have everything in place that you need to. So based on those poll results, it does look like folks do have a pretty clear policy, which is good. So hopefully this is mostly review, but if you can learn a thing or two, that's always great as well. So getting into this to start, I do want to talk about some of the different emergency calling options. So we do have 5 shown on the screen here, and I do want to mention that which one of these methods that are used is basically going to be dependent on the situation that you're in, your legal requirements, and potentially some regulations as well. So one of these is going to be used, it just may depend on the situation. So to start off, let's talk about static or default. And this is what folks most typically think of when they think of emergency calling. This is when there's a dispatchable civic address that essentially you will route emergency services to that address regardless of where someone actually is, which can be good if you're always in the same location, but can be a bad situation if you do decide to move. Now, if you do have users who are more on the go, that's where dynamic emergency calling is going to be beneficial, because you can still have that static civic address, but it's going to check to make sure that you haven't changed locations. And if you have changed locations, then it's going to redirect that to the correct PSAP or public safety answering point. The third option is triage. So this is when calls are sent not directly to emergency services, but to a service desk that will basically route the call according to where you actually are. So this will happen in situations where either a service or a provider can't 100% confirm where you are. So they triage the call beforehand just to make sure that you are in the location that you intend to be at and that the emergency services can go to the right spot. The fourth part of this is dedicated service, and this is where a dedicated phone is positioned in a building that you're in, on your desk, whatever it may be, and that is only used for emergency calls. So an example of this would be red phones. And then the final one here for our emergency calling options is a soft policy. So this is essentially what we call when you do have a company policy that you're not going to use corporate phones for actually emergency calling at all or calling at all. You're only going to be using mobile phones. And in that case, you wouldn't really need an emergency calling option set up for any physical phones because they're not there. So you do have a couple of different options, and we'll talk about some of these more in depth as we go. All right, so let's talk a little bit more now about dynamic emergency calling, because this is kind of a pretty important one, and like I mentioned, does have a lot of use cases and benefits to it. So like I alluded to before, this is a feature inside of Teams that will essentially make sure that you are sending that information on where you currently are located to the correct public safety answering point or PSAP. And the way it's going to actually do this is basically by you as a Teams admin uploading location information to your Teams admin center. And then from there, Teams will essentially check to see if you are at one of the locations that your organization has officially inputted. So if it detects that you're connected to a certain network, then it'll know that you are at a particular site, and it'll dispatch that or send that call to the appropriate PSAP at that point. So this is something that will require you to set up the location information services or LIS, and then also that network configuration data in the Teams admin center. But once you do have that set up, this is going to kind of kick in automatically. So definitely a great option to utilize if you do have users who are on the move more. So now let's talk a little bit, we talked about different calling options here, but now let's talk about how this can be handled. So we do have those different options, but once that call is made, it can be a little bit different depending on how you have things set up. So we can see on the screen now, we have 4 different options being a voice carrier or a provider. So this is essentially a situation where you're not using Teams for calling. And then the other 3 are obviously if you are using Teams for calling. So that includes direct routing, calling plans, and operator connect, which we kind of group together, and then Teams. So depending on which PSTN connectivity you have is going to change things. So for the voice carrier and the provider, that is where the address is actually provisioned at the carrier, and that's where you have that static emergency calling. But in the case of Teams, this is going to differ based on the different types of connectivity. So for direct routing, you are going to need some configuration inside of Teams for that dynamic E911. So if you want to upgrade it just from the static, you will need to include those location information and the network topology there. And then also within direct routing, we'll talk about this a little bit later, there are some additional components that you'll need to set up in order for those voice routes to be configured the correct way and for those calls to get to the right location. And then for calling plans and operator connect, again, we kind of group these together. For calling plans specifically, they are kind of built in. So we do have a set way in which these calls happen, which we'll get into in the next slide. And then for operator connect, the service is normally built in, but there may be some additional charges depending on who you're partnering with as your operator for that. So that would be a situation where we do encourage you to reach out to your operator if you do have that set up to just make sure you have all of your bases covered. And then on the team side of things, this is where we kind of get into setting up the more Teams specific aspects of this. So for dynamic emergency calling, for example, this is where we set up the network topology and the location information services. But also this includes components like your emergency calling policies that you're applying to users. In addition, for direct routing specifically, you will need to set up an emergency call routing policy, which is its own separate thing. So getting a little bit more into the specifics here, let's start with talking about calling plans. So there are going to be some differences if we're talking about folks in the US as opposed to folks in the rest of the world. So we do have for the US a pretty set way of things and how these emergency calls are handled. So, if you are placing a 911 call in the US that contains an emergency address with a specific geocode, then those are automatically going to be routed to the correct PSAP. So, if you have that dynamic emergency calling set up, if it detects you're at a specific office or a specific building, you're connected to a certain network that you've already defined, we're automatically going to send the call to the right location. But if you don't have something like that set up and teams can't confirm you are in a particular location, what it'll do is it'll instead first route that call to a national screening center. And what it'll do there is just verify that user's address and then route it to the right location. And this, again, is just to make sure that you are in the location we think you're in. Once we get that confirmation, we'll get it to the right location, and then you'll have those emergency services go to where they're needed to. Now, when speaking about the rest of the world, it does differ from country to country. We have two groups of examples here. The first group is Germany, France, and Spain. So for that group of particular countries, calls are actually going to be routed to the PSAP based on your telephone number assignment. So it is going to be a little bit different. It's going to take a look at that phone number and then route the call accordingly. So you do want to make sure that you are assigning those telephone numbers to the folks in those appropriate locations. So that's where assignment of the particular phone numbers is going to be particularly important. As opposed to something like, in the US, really whatever number you get from Microsoft or that you've ported over, really it doesn't matter too much which specific number you get in the US as opposed to Germany, France, and Spain. And then also in the Canada, the UK, and Australia, emergency calls are going to be automatically routed to a screening center. Which is essentially going to be the behavior that we have in the US. Just, we're not going to automatically route anything. If you are detected to be at a location, we're always going to screen those calls in those three countries. All right, so moving on to how direct routing works. So like I mentioned, there are some additional things we need to configure here for direct routing and making sure we have emergency calling set up the right way. This includes a PSTN usage, an online voice route, a online PSTN gateway, an emergency number string, and then finally, an emergency call routing policy. So starting off just talking about a few of those, the PSTN usage record is basically used to determine which route the emergency calls should follow. So if someone has a particular PSTN usage assigned to them, that's going to determine the route itself, whoever has that assigned. So the route is going to point to a SIP trunk dedicated to emergency calls or to an emergency location identification number or an ELIN gateway. That's basically just going to route calls to the nearest PSAP. So that is something you will need to configure on that end. And then also, when we're talking about things like the emergency number string, that's where you can actually determine, what numbers can be called to initiate that emergency call. So, for example, if you want something other than 911, if you want something close to that, like 910 or 912, whatever it may be, that's where you can define those in that emergency number string. And then the emergency call routing policy kind of encompasses all of those aspects above. So the emergency call routing policy is what you can assign to users. And once they have that policy assigned, they're going to be good to go for emergency calling, assuming everything is configured the right way. Now, again, it is going to differ a little bit in terms of its behavior when we're talking about the US versus the rest of the world. So within the US, your call routing service provider can be used basically with that location information sent directly to them with the, in a specific format. And that's going to be the PIDF low format. And you can look at what those initials mean on the slide here. And then for the rest of the world, an SBC with the ELI and gateway capability enabled, which will basically go ahead and take that number and then basically send that within that message in the PIDF low format. And essentially, that will make sure that the call is going to be routed to the correct PSAP because we have that location information embedded in that call. All right. So we're now going to talk a little bit more about the US requirements for emergency calling. So there are a couple of key components to this. If you have experience with emergency calling and setting this up, you're probably going to be familiar with these two specific FCC regulations, those being Kerry's Law and Ray-Baum's Act. So to quickly cover these, Kerry's Law basically says that users can't be required to dial an external code before they dial a emergency phone number. So for example, they don't have to dial a 9 before they dial 911. They can just dial 911 and be able to have that call routed the right way. And then for Ray-Baum's Act, that's going to be requiring the enabling of dynamic location services if it's technically feasible. So basically just making sure that if you do want to enable dynamic emergency calling, it should be possible if the service or the device allows it to. So these are important things to consider. We do have a link on the screen now to more information on these specific requirements if you are interested. But the main point here is that Teams does accommodate and comply with both of these. So we give you the tools to make sure that you are meeting these requirements. It is going to be on you, though, to make sure that these are configured the right way. And then looking at another requirement, this is some requirements for your emergency response locations. So this is essentially showing where these can actually be located and kind of how distant they can be from one another. So the states in blue are going to require a emergency response location per 7,000 square feet. And for the other ones in white, it's going to be every 40,000 square feet. So that's something to be aware of as well. And again, we do have a link on the screen now. And afterwards, once you're looking at the presentation, once we've finished up today, if you want more information on that. So talking about planning considerations. So we are kind of wrapping up this particular section. All of the considerations are shown on the screen. I'm not going to read them point by point. The main things are that you do want to make sure that you are considering any regional or state requirements that you may have for emergency calling, as well as obviously making sure to comply with those two FCC regulations that I mentioned, being Ray-Baum's Act and Kerry's Law. So you want to make sure that users of all of those different connectivity types, whether it's direct routing, calling plans, or operator connect, are going to have the option to correctly route those calls, and you're accommodating for each of those different scenarios. So if you do want the specific list, we do have a lot of great documentation on this, and we'll talk about some resources at the end of my section. But this slide is also a great compilation of a lot of different considerations that you want to make sure you are accounting for in the planning process. The last thing I want to talk about with the emergency calling side of things is the user experience. So just to give a little bit of insight into this, in case you weren't aware, with the user experience, the top right-hand image is what's going to be displayed when you're actually making an emergency call in Teams. So once you see that little red circle with the warning logo in there, you know that you are indeed making an emergency call. If you don't see this, then something is going to be off. You're not technically making an emergency call. So you want to make sure things are configured the right way so that you are able to go ahead and make the emergency calls appropriately. And we do have a testing number for this. It was noted on an earlier slide. That's going to be 933. So if you do want to test out how these things would work, that's going to be a good option to utilize when you are all set up and ready to test out how that experience would go. And then within your emergency call policies, one of the things you can set up is notifications to other users in your organization. So let's say, for example, you want to have a particular security desk alerted whenever someone makes an emergency call. You can set that up in your emergency calling policies. And the message that those users would receive, if they're not directly looped into the call, which is one of the options, that message that they receive looks like the one shown on the bottom image here. So it'll send an important chat message to you. It'll let you know which user has placed the emergency call and let you know their location as well. And then one important thing that is a more recent development within Teams is the work at home user experience. So we have enhanced this a little bit and made it a lot better for folks, because anyone who's working at home will actually have the ability to modify their emergency address inside of the Calls app itself. So you'll have the ability to edit that emergency information by clicking on that address in the bottom left-hand corner, and then clicking edit and then adjusting the details in there. So an important note to make here as well is it may actually auto-populate that information from your system information. So if you are working from home, it is important to go ahead and check what's listed in there so that it is going to be routed the right way. Now, I do want to note how these calls would be routed in these different circumstances. So if the emergency address is obtained from the operating system without confirmation by the user, so it auto-populates an address there, but the user doesn't actually confirm that that's the address they're at, the call is still going to be screened and transferred to the PSAP after that screening has taken place. So if the user has not confirmed that address, it's still going to be screened beforehand. In addition, if you have confirmed or the user has confirmed that that address is where they're located, it's actually going to be routed directly to the PSAP, which is kind of a nice change and allows you to feel a little bit more comfortable with getting the call routed to the right location. So another situation where that would happen is maybe you didn't confirm the address listed for, you didn't actually confirm it, but you did edit it and adjust it, then it's also going to route directly to the PSAP. So again, a nice benefit to getting it directly to the location you need it to be. And the final thing I wanted to mention here, this will apply for all of the different types of connectivity options. So users can change this setting and that address for direct routing, calling plans, and operator connect. All right, so what we're going to do now is move into our final section here, which is going to be SIP Gateway. And before we do that, we are going to list one more poll question out for you guys. And this is just a question to hear a little bit more from you. And the question is going to be, how does your company utilize your existing calling solution today? So if it's hardware phones only, if you're using headsets and soft clients, or a combination of both. It'll be kind of interesting to see the results there. But in the interest of time, I do want to go ahead and continue. All right, so talking about SIP Gateway. So what this will allow you to do is essentially use compatible third-party SIP phones with Teams, and essentially allow you to continue using those phones without them being technically Teams certified devices like we have as well. So users can sign into Teams with their right credentials, make and receive calls with those phones on their desk, and essentially use them in a couple of other different ways as well. Now, we do have SIP Gateway for some specific phones right now. We are going to be adding support for more types of phones in the future. So something to be aware of, this is going to be an evolving feature. So be sure to be on the lookout for updates from us, from the roadmap or from the message center, as we will be talking about those in the future. And I do want to mention here as well that there are some core calling capabilities missing, and the user experience as well as the admin management experience aren't going to be as fully featured with a native Teams device. So there are going to be some limitations as compared to the more modern Teams certified phones, but you do still have a lot of different options to use with these different SIP phones. So talking about some of the calling features here, you can go ahead and take a look at this list. So the calling features listed on the screen are provided by SIP Gateway, but they are currently limited to the ones on the screen right now. But again, like our support with the types of phones you can use, we're also expanding these capabilities as well. So always be on the lookout for this, as it is going to be evolving and adding more and more. All right. And for SIP Gateway, we also have different types of call treatment capabilities. So this is essentially what you can do with a call. So this includes things like call transfers, local call forwarding, putting it on do not disturb. Um, so basically, the device won't ring for incoming calls. And also things like voicemail and message waiting indicators. So if you want notifications that alert them when you have a new voicemail message, you can go ahead and get those notifications as well from these devices. All right, so moving into compatible devices for SIP Gateway. Again, I don't want to talk about the specifics here. You guys can take a look at the list on the screen now. In addition, you can also take a look at the documentation link here. And this should be a link to the compatible device list. So if you are interested in which SIP phones are going to be usable with SIP Gateway, you can go ahead and take a look at that documentation listed here. But the main providers right now are going to be SpectraLink, Cisco, Audio Codes, Poly, and Yealink, with the specific models listed underneath them. All right, so our final section here is going to be talking about onboarding and provisioning. So something important to call out is a user's calling policy. So you want to make sure that users are able to make private calls. In addition, you've also enabled them for SIP devices to be used for these calls. So you want to make sure both of those options are turned on for a user's calling policy. In addition, if you do want local forwarding to be able to happen, you do want to make sure you're allowing for those call redirects to be happening. Now, an important call out here is that allow call redirect is a PowerShell only setting. So you will need to go into PowerShell if you do want to make sure that that is enabled. So just something to be aware of. You can use the set CS Teams calling policy commandlet in order to access that and change its value. So you do want to make sure that is set to enabled. In terms of user requirements, it is maybe a little bit complicated on the right-hand side. I'll kind of simplify it a little bit, where you do need to make sure that users are licensed Office 365 users, and they have some sort of PSTN connectivity, whether that's calling plans, direct routing, or operator connect, and that includes a phone number and a calling policy. And then with that license, they either need a phone system license or a Microsoft Teams shared device license. So they need to be basically enabled for PSTN. They need to have a phone number, and then they need the appropriate licensing, which includes phone system license or the shared device license. So they need one of those two. On the network and security side of things, one really important thing to note, and this goes for not only SIP Gateway, but for other things, but you do want to make sure that your firewall is open to traffic from Microsoft 365 and Teams specifically. You want to make sure that the SIP devices aren't behind a proxy, and then also making sure to open some specific ports on that firewall as well. The ranges are shown on the screen here too. Now, if you are looking for a little bit more consolidated information on this, or if you're interested in having this information outputted in a nice JSON format, I definitely encourage you to check out the link at the bottom of the screen. It's a link to our Office 365 URL and IP address ranges page. And also within that, you can get to our web service. So this is another way in which you can just have that information automatically inputted, or in even some cases, automatically sent to your network devices as well. So a lot of cool options there. And for the specifics, I definitely encourage you to check out that documentation when you have the time. In terms of managing the SIP devices themselves, it's important to call out that you can actually manage them from the Teams Admin Center now. So inside of the Teams devices sections at the very bottom, you are going to see SIP devices as a section. So once you go ahead and open that up, if you do have any of these devices, you can see all of the ones that are enrolled. You can look at their sign-in status and actually manually sign in and sign out users if you need to. I know it says sing out users there. That's a typo. Um, in this screen, you can also go ahead and restart devices. You can assign tags to them if you want to be able to organize them a little bit more effectively and manage them in groups as opposed to just individually. And you can also provision one or multiple SIP devices from this screen as well. And then by selecting the different users, you can also see the device history too. So a lot of great options here, very similar to the other sections of the Teams device portion of the Admin Center. So if you're familiar with that, not too much is going to be adjusted here, and you have a lot of those same options at your disposal. All right, so with regards to your different provisioning options, you can go ahead and either do it manually, so basically configuring your SIP gateway server URL in your DHCP server, or I'm sorry, I apologize. So you have the option of manually configuring every phone through the web interface, or you can go ahead and configure your SIP gateway provisioning server URL in your DHCP server. Sorry, I got a little bit confused there. So you do have those two main options here. In terms of the steps itself, you do want to make sure you're up to date on the latest SIP firmware using the default configuration, and then you are resetting the device to factory settings before proceeding, because that'll just ensure that everything goes well and everything gets provisioned the right way. If you are kind of wondering whether or not a device has been successfully onboarded, it will display the Teams logo and the sign-in button as well. So that's another way to just guarantee that it has been all correctly rolled out. All right, so SIP devices can usually display information in a couple of different languages, and in some cases, a lot of different languages. So setting that UI language affects its interface. So things like soft keys and sign in and sign out messages. So actually setting that UI language is done in the provisioning server using the DHCP server, or you can do it manually by basically appending a code string in the URL. And we show examples on actually doing that on the bottom of this screen. So we can go ahead and adjust things for setting those phones for German, or setting Cisco phones to Japanese, those different types of things. So it is something to just be aware of. And then as a final note for this slide, the system will default to English if the selected language is not supported by the SIP endpoint. So for example, if Japanese is not supported by Yealink, then it is going to default to English in that circumstance. Something to be aware of, especially for those overseas users. All right, so there are going to be 3 different steps to actually signing into one of these SIP gateway devices. The first is going to be pressing the sign in button on your SIP phone. And what that's going to do is actually display an auth URL and a pairing code. So you do want to make sure you're navigating to that URL on your desktop or mobile device, and then logging in using your corporate credentials, the ones associated with your Teams account. And then finally, you're going to be entering in that pairing code displayed on the device as well. That'll basically pair the SIP phone with your account. And then once that successfully goes through, the SIP phone is going to display your or this user's number and the username as well, if that is supported by the device. And as a note here, The SIP phone authentication is going to be supporting and honoring all your different types of policies like SSO, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, all those different types of things. It will still be supported in this circumstance as well. And then a final note here, that pairing code is time sensitive. So if it does expire, you are going to basically have to restart those 3 steps. So just something to be aware of. If you take too long there, you will have to start once again. All right, only 2 more slides for me. So this next one is talking about remote enrollment. So there is the option for remote enrollment for a couple of, or for multiple devices at once. So you can actually do this provisioning from the Teams admin center, like I mentioned, either individually or in batches, by basically uploading a list of the devices to be provisioned. So what that'll do is, once you go ahead and upload that list, the admin is basically going to generate a verification code, or a kind of a one-time password for each of those devices. And then you can hand that over to a technician or a user to enroll that device from there. So the technician or the user will enroll that device by typing in that code, followed by the OTP. So the one-time password. So you can set the code to 50 or star 55 star, and then that one-time passcode or password is 123456. Then you dial the star 55 star and then 123456, and that will enroll the device. So this is a nice way to do this remotely. If you want to do this for multiple locations at once, this is a great option to use. But it does require some coordination on your part as well as the users or the technicians as well. All right, and then the final thing I want to talk about here before we move on to our resources and then move on to the rest of today's conversations is going to be the SIP Gateway update, where SIP Gateway will soon support analog devices and overhead paging devices. So we will support analog telephones. If you want to use Teams calling on the different devices shown on the screen here, specifically from audio codes, Cisco and Poly at the moment. So if you do want to use these on these ATA or analog telephone adapter models shown on the screen here, you'll soon actually be able to do so. This still should be in public preview and rolling out here fairly soon. So something to be aware of as well. All right, and then my final slide. This is a list of a bunch of different links that are a little bit more general, but these are great jumping off points for our documentation. So if you are interested in learning more, if you want to recap of what we covered today, or dive a little bit deeper into the specifics for what you need to do for emergency calling, auto attendance and call queues, SIP gateway, whatever it may be, definitely encourage you to use those links or save them for later and utilize them when you're actually going through these processes, because they do help a lot in conveying the right information and making sure you're hitting all of your bases there. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah. Thank you guys for listening in, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Cam. And thanks, Nick. That was great information. I know folks really appreciate going down into that next level of detail and getting into the more technical nitty gritty. So thanks very much for all of that. We are going to go into Q&A. So think about some of those questions that you want to ask of both Cam and Nick, and we do have some other technical SMEs on the line with us here today. But before we do that, I want to hand things over to my friend from our Fast Track team, Morgan Black. She is here to just do a quick follow-on to something that was shared with us by Martin last week around Fast Track, to talk about very briefly the Fast Track benefit that you all have available to you. So Morgan, if you want to just take us through at really high level the Fast Track benefit today,
Yes.
that'd be really great.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me. I was so excited. I even wore my popcorn glasses today. And then Nick and Cam, that was jam-packed. So thank you for presenting that. And I just want to give super high level of Fast Track. I want to talk to you about what Fast Track looks like high level, and also what the Fast Track team looks like high level, and then how it could be beneficial to any org, large or small. So when we think about Fast Track, we've heard both Nick and Cam say things like onboarding and configuration, and that can come at all different levels. So when you want to think about configuration and onboarding any type of product into your org, you think about having a team of support, and that's exactly what we are here at Fast Track. So with that, we are coming with you at no additional cost. It is a service that is provided to you. Um, it's a really cool team of people that have your best interest at heart. When you think about having a team and cheering for you and helping you on board, we come with individuals like myself. I'm a Fast Track manager. Some of my customers call me their guru. Some of them call me Jiminy Cricket. I'm here as a Fast Track manager to support and then help collaborate all these fantastic technical resources. We have the ability to bring in our SMEs, so those that have a general knowledge, and then those like we heard from Nick that are really specific to products such as Teams. I'm not going to read over these. You will get access to these slides, but I think it's really important to know that we're not just one product. Think about Fast Track is your Microsoft 365 support. So a lot of times we'll work with customers, for example, if you need assistance with Teams, and then we start having other conversations and we're like, oh yeah, let's add this workload on as well. So again, that is at a no additional cost. So that's really vital to think about the success of your engagements. And another cool tool is a lot of times there's conversations. We are across industries. So for example, for my healthcare customers, they may ask questions like, so what are other healthcare industries using? How are they using this effectively? What are the best practices? We don't remote in. We are over the shoulder guidance, but we work with you. You have someone sharing your screen and we walk you step by step to ensure a successful deployment. Um, I think this is important just to hit it super high level. I'm not going to dive too deep into it because you'll have access to this moving forward. But we do follow a deployment timeline. But I like to tell my customers, every customer is different, right? They're like snow. We see snow and we're like, oh my gosh, beautiful white snow, but they're all so different. So we take that customized approach with each customer. We help from the beginning. We help you with the prereq work. We remediate any of issues, and then we start bringing in those technical resources to really help you get that product onboarded. Again, this will be provided to you. This is just a holistic scope. I think the big thing to think about is with Fast Track, we are that remote guidance, but we will be with you every step of the way. It is, again, customizable. Typically, we like to work with customers weekly, but I have some customers bi-weekly and even some customers once a month. So we really worked with you and your org to really just make sure that we're hearing the need and meeting that need for a successful deployment. So this is the meat and potatoes of where I want to land and how do we get engaged. Again, like I said, you don't have to worry about paying for our resources. This is a clickable link, and again, it will also be shared, I believe, in the chat as well as after in the PowerPoint. Just fill out this form. It's an easy form. Tell us what your needs are, and then someone from the Fast Track Center will reach out to you. So there is no hunting for how do we get engaged, and the process will go smoothly from there. So once the form's filled out, you'll have someone reach out to you, and then we will start moving forward with the deployment. So with that, I will turn it over back to Sarah.
Thanks, Morgan. That's so great. I love this resource. I say it every time that we have this little presentation. It's such a great benefit for folks to be able to glom onto. We really are. I mean, I feel like it really shows the commitment that Microsoft has for the investment our customers make in us. So if you're interested, if you're at that part of your journey that you're ready to get support, we're here for you. So fill out the form if you're interested, and we're here for you.